Hello everyone. We're going to get started with the live stream in just a couple minutes, just waiting for people to trickle into the stream. So how are y'all doing? I am pretty tired. Been working on this slide for a while. I'm going to try out something new for this. Hey, it is live, John. I'm also waiting because whenever the stream is being recorded, YouTube tends to like chop off like the beginning seconds. All right. Okay, it is 3:02. I am going to get started. All right, hello everyone. We are going to talk about beautifying your website with Figma. So let's start off with introductions. I am Long Nguyen. Hello, and I am a third-year computer science student. I love anything code and design related. I am very deeply artistic. So code, design, and me, we're best friends. I'm a researcher at the Hybrid Atelier, so I make a lot of wacky, crazy things. And I like to game on the side. I'm playing Planescape Torment right now, and I am an unhealthy foodie. So before I dig a little deeper into the slides, I just want to say um, this presentation will be half like regular presentation, but the other half will be live. We'll be making a website, and it's gonna go over the basics of Figma, but we may or may not finish it, so just be aware. All right, so what is Figma and how does it relate to design? So Figma is a pretty all-purpose design tool. It can design, it can prototype, it can animate, you can play games on it. People like make cities and towns in it to like interact with each other. It's like this multiplayer design crazy all-purpose platform. And here I have two examples of it being used. On the left is material design. They are the design system that Google has made. You can see the mobile UI components here. Typically, we like to plan out our UI here, and then we prototype these UIs to see how users might actually use it and then get feedback, which is something Figma also supports. On the right is an illustration that I have made using Figma, so it can be used similarly to Adobe Illustrator where you can compose some graphics if you want to. All right, so let's dig into the creative process. So why am I going over the creative process before going to Figma? I feel like one really big mistake in design is that we like to directly go into Figma and the tool first before we actually think about how that design actually connects to our goal or idea. So I'm going to go over my creative process. I feel like in general, creative processes are really individual to each person. Everyone's got their own way of doing something. So don't take mine as law. This is just how I use it. And you might use this as a starting place or just try to see how designs come to life. The first step in my creative process is researching. Design comes with a lot of research. So what kind of research? It's about gathering all sorts of sources and inspiration and knowledge about a specific goal or topic for your design. And you want to use these sources of inspiration to brainstorm and create a bunch of ideas, not looks, particularly ideas, right? You don't want to make something that just looks, right? You want something that has substance, value, and meaning, and make sure that these ideas are something that feel like something, right? And they don't have to be all perfectly good or wonderful ideas, as long as you have a lot. Because a common quote in art and design is that your first idea or design is likely not your best one. You can come up with so many more. And in fact, if you know some of the visual communication students at UTA, some of the design work they do, they make hundreds and hundreds of little thumbnails and designs just to come up with the right idea. So that just gives you a little bit of perspective on just how important that research phase is. And I'll go into more detail how that looks like in the next few slides, but I'm going to go into step 2, which is the refinement stage for me, which is me selecting certain ideas that I really like and then exploring them further, growing these ideas to something more, trying to see what they can become and how closely related it is to my goal at the very beginning, right? So after I refine my design up to its final stage or final product, quote unquote, I reflect on this design, see how it connects to the big picture and see if it works well. If it doesn't, I have to research and follow through the steps all over again. So it's technically kind of like a cycle. If you put all these parts together, it is really close to experimentation, right? You're making a bunch of tests to see how things look and feel, because design is something that isn't really theoretical and there's not a mathematical foundation. The only way, and from my experience, for you to know for sure if something is right or not is to see how you feel about it. And you can't see how you feel about it if you try to theorize or try to algorithmically produce the design. You have to make it and just see if it works out. And I've included a graphic on the bottom to kind of give an example of the process in practice. So I have 3 squiggly lines, right? And they all look differently. But let's say the first 3 squigglies they come from research, right? I'm trying to make a line. One is squiggly, another is geometric, another is patterned, right? They all come from different sources. Say, let's go onto stage 2, which is refinement. Like I choose this middle one right here. I'm really inspired off of its geometric chaoticness, right? It gives off this crazy vibe. So I'm going to refine that design. What if I focus on the triangles I see and I create this abstract shape over here? Or what if I focus on the triangles connecting each other into like all these abstract shapes and I create another design over here? And what if I focus specifically on the chaos the lines make, right? Then I can make this one last final design over here. So in summary, it really is experimentation. As you can see, each one is different. They convey a different idea. Some of them are closely related, some are not. But ideas that you're making, well, an idea and making sure you're connecting it. Okay, so let's try to put this into practice and into something practical. Let's try to redesign the Mobi website. So let's say our prompt is, or at least what the feeling we're going for is, that Mobi is a developer coffee shop. It's a place to hang, chill, code, and have fun. So that's the idea that we're going off of. So I'm like, okay, it's a coffee shop. So I'll literally look up a coffee shop. Okay, so research, it doesn't have to be just pictures. It can be so many things. I feel like in design, a lot of people find their inspiration and research in a lot of things. Some people, like, say I might go to an actual coffee shop and draw on the environment and see what parts of the coffee shop really make it like chill and vibey, right? For simplicity, I'm just using pictures. So let's say I'm gonna get a little bit deeper into the research, right? So for example, let's go with the theme coffee, right? What makes a coffee shop? One thing is, like, I see a lot of wood, I see the bricks, the plants, right? They make things feel really homey, and the hanging lights, right? And in the second picture, you also have the bricks, wood, warmth colors, and then like this coffee shop on the top right picture with the yellow chairs. You can see like it has some sort of layout, like a menu. Like you see that menu, it's like really gridded like. And then one last piece of design is a code editor that I see in VS Code, right? So taking parts from all this research, I like to combine and contrast and create all these different ideas, right? And that's what we're going to do with the next step, which is to make the ideas. So we're going to draw parts from the research, right? Look at the menu, right? It's like a grid, and it kind of reminds me of the backdrop of a coding editor. And I really like how this table is in the front. Like, it's a place where you go towards and grab your coffee, maybe converse with whoever's selling the coffee. And then there's always like a conversational space with a coffee shop, right? And it feels a little off, right? You're like, okay, why are you talking so much about this coffee shop? Like, how is it even related to the web design? So let's try to convey the same feelings and ideas that we understand from a coffee shop in a web design, right? One thing about web design is that it's a really free and open medium, right? You can make your website design in any way you want. But the big thing about web design is that there are certain expectations with it, and those expectations kind of form the user experience of a website. So one big part is, for example, where the brand logo goes or the navigation. People have expectations where that might go. But in general, whenever you come with the ideas, right, notice how it's like really sketchy. It's not even formally laid out, and you're not really filling the content out. What you care about for the ideas is less about what it looks like, but about the idea and the impression that it really makes. So it doesn't have to be perfect, straight, or anything. You just have to lay things out and see the connection that you already intended to make. So for example, my first design, I'm just like focusing on certain parts of my research. So for example, look at this menu and this table, right? Square, rectangle. And I literally replicated that here, right? So this is a blackboard, and this is the bar table thing in front. And then there's like some kind of coffee or person or presence on the top, right? And then below that is, I call it the table space. So typically a lot of websites, the flow is that on the top you have your advertising area where you want to get people's attention, right? And in the second half, which is underneath what is the full screen, you have descriptions or details about what your design project is or what your website's all about. A lot of people tend to follow like a zigzag motion to try to lead you throughout the site. But one thing that I really want to emphasize is trying to be different, right? Because every single website's the same. And if you make your website a little bit different in small ways, it'll get more attention. And I think that's really what matters the most, is that it's able to sell and it really draws the attention. All right, so for this part, notice that it's a bunch of squares and lines. The lines are just text, right? Again, trying to keep things simple. But what I tried to do here is really lay things out, just like the way I imagine a coffee shop table would be laid out. Like, one thing we could do is, like, for example, the table might be like an idea. Like, whenever we talk about coffee at a table, we usually have a topic to talk about. So each table, quote unquote, might be a picture frame about a topic or principle of Mobi. And people usually talk at tables, so maybe we have circles on the side to kind of represent testimony. And we have text underneath the tables to kind of give more description. So in this small way, we are already differentiating ourselves from other websites, which typically follow kind of like a zigzag flow of content. And again, whenever you try to make a lot of ideas, you want to make multiple. In this case, I only made 2, so it's simple. But I'll go over the second idea to give y'all an impression. Like, if you come up with more ideas, it's better, right? So this one is based off of a brick layout. So I'm like going crazy on the bricks here. And I'm using bricks as a frame. Like, imagine if I could put stickers on each of the brick. And I'm using boxes to fill up content. Like, maybe have a menu laid up on top of the bricks, right? And lay things out accordingly to like a brick structure. So it feels kind of like that coffee shop brick thing. And on the bottom, I'm using a more traditional layout. So sometimes, say your client or whoever you're making your website for, like, another thing about unconventional layouts is that they take time and maybe you want some simplicity. So if you wanted to go for a typical zigzag layout, you might use something like this in mind, right? And you got to make the best of what you got. And one thing in general for like designing websites and things and just in general is that it's really like designing a room. Imagine if you went into a room and it's empty and you wanted to make that room yours, right? You would have to think about what's the flooring, where's the furniture going to go, what's the function of that room, like does it, like if it's a bedroom it needs a bed, right? Where would that bed go, right? You have to think about how that function is used and how you find each part and where you placed it is useful for you. So it's really close to designing a room. I would use that metaphor every time for trying to show if it is to kind of guide you how to design your website. All right. Okay, on to the next slide. Now let's try to actually implement these websites. So what I'm going to do is actually go at this live. So I honestly don't know what this website's going to look like. And I'm actually hoping to work with y'all to see how it goes. But I'm showing y'all a very realistic view of what a design workflow in Figma looks like. Because I think it's more useful than just like literally tutorial, like laying out each part's like a tutorial. Okay, so let's get into Figma. Okay, so if you have a Figma account, you can just go to Figma. You'll be put into the recent screen where you can see the recent projects you have made. But typically, all of your Figma documents will live in drafts. And if you have a free account, you can have like infinite drafts. So it's pretty convenient. All right, so let's make one. Plus, you can also make one here with a new button. So let me share this Figma file to everyone so y'all are able to follow along. Okay. Let me send it here and here on Discord. I sent it into 2 places so y'all can have access to this file. All right, so you have a blank screen. What to do, right? Well, in Figma, the most important part, I think, to like fill out each screen is the idea of a frame. So a frame is a screen. So if you press F or you go to the frame selection over here and you see the selection towards the right, you can see all sorts of options. We're designing a desktop screen, so we're gonna click on desktop. All right. And the next thing that I would say is really useful is to grab your references. All right, so what I mean by that is, where did you get inspired for your idea? So we'll go to Figma over here. If we can grab, let me go. So you can have multiple Figma tabs, one for your original, the Figma you're working on, and one for maybe where your inspiration is. So for me, my ideas is like this, right? So I have my reference side by side from the desktop and to this. Okay, so whenever I start designing a website, I used to like follow up with the small details. But if you work in art a lot, a big thing a lot in art and design is conveying the idea over the small details. The small details, you can always resolve the small details, but you have to get the main parts, the main big picture right. So what does that mean? So I'm gonna go with the first design because it's simpler for time's sake, right? And as you can tell, what's really important, right? What's really important are the main layout components. So like the big squares, the text, the other text, right? So we're gonna do that right now. So how do we do that? How do we fill things into this blank empty screen, this blank empty Figma screen? So what we're gonna have to do is use the rectangle tool to make these shapes in the first place. All right, so to select your Figma document, right? And then to make a shape, you have to press on the rectangle tool, which is this square over here, or you can press R and you can make your shapes. So I'm making a blackboard, so I and making a black board. So how do I change the colors? I select, right? I select by clicking on the shape, and then I change it to black. Okay, now I need to get that front rectangle. So a lot of people in web design, one common thing that people like to do is that they like to make sure their dimensions are proper and correct. So they'll try to get the pixels right. They're like, all right, I need this to be 60 pixels apart. So they'll like literally measure 60 pixels apart, and then they'll do that to make sure everything's right. Because in web design, the only way to lay out certain components is to use pixel dimensions. And I feel like that, like, on one hand, it's a necessary thing because that's just how the web works. But on the other hand, while you're designing, do you really care about if it's 4 or 3 pixels apart while you're still in the early phases of designing, right? It's kind of like unnecessary at this point. You're not making your website yet. So the biggest part is to make sure it's at the right spot, or just in the right general area. So what did I just do here, right? So I have a rectangle and I'm trying to make another one, but I don't want to use the rectangle tool to drag out another rectangle every time. So what I do is I select this rectangle or square, whatever, and I can hold the Alt key, and I can drag to duplicate. This is something I do all the time, especially in UI work. You have like 30 buttons and you need to duplicate 30 of them 30 times. So you just hold Alt, 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 boom. You have like squares everywhere. Cool. So I'm going to do just that. I'm going to change my square. So now I have to make my rectangle, right? So I can drag on the edges to resize. This is common in a lot of editing software. But say, what if this was already too long and you would like to make this shorter, right? Oh, it's easy. I can just drag both sides to adjust how I want things. But you know, it can be a little cumbersome sometimes. So I'm gonna change the color to make it more visible for y'all. One way we can make our process easier is by resizing things at both sides at the same time. So like this. So you hold Alt and you drag an edge, and you can change the edge sizing every time. I swear it looks like it's a unique special use case, but let me tell you, I use this thing all the time. You can go up and down too. And another thing I do a lot is resizing. So you can resize like this, but it's not uniform. It doesn't keep its aspect ratio, which is another really big thing in web design. Like certain things have to maintain their aspect ratio, especially for pictures, because if you like drag up a picture like this, you can distort it, you can chop off certain edges. It's just not a fun experience. So a lot of times you want to resize things uniformly. So to do that, hover over a corner until you see a diagonal arrow, and then you hold Shift, and now you're scaling things uniformly. Another thing that I like to do is whenever I move things around, I don't like to move things in like this unpredictable dimension everywhere. I like to move it straight up or down. So what I would do is hold Shift, right? If I hold Shift, now I move in one direction, just like that. So it gives me a lot of control. And one last thing I like to do, this is especially whenever I'm trying to get all the pixel dimensions right for like delivering the web design. Whenever I'm done coming up with the general ideas and coming up with the details, what I like to do is to make sure that the pixels are right, I can nudge the shape left or right using the arrow keys. So I can nudge left, nudge right, and if you hold Shift, you can nudge at a bigger rate. And you might think, okay, who does that? Like, who's gonna like literally move things by the point? Well, a lot of web designers do, because you have to get it literally right at the point. And sometimes you might notice things off by like literally a smidgen. Like that might trigger some people's OCD. This is literally the perfect tool for that. And you can see how much you're nudging things by hovering over to a secondary element, right? So how do you see these orange lines that tell you how far away this one element is to the other? So I select an element, right? And then I hover over the other element and I hold Alt, and I'm able to see how far my shape is away from the other. Okay, so again, I'm holding Shift and using my arrow keys to nudge the shape back and forth, and you can see the dimensions moving. So that part is useful. So here I'm gonna move like this. I can hold the arrow keys to nudge my shape around, and it might be a really small thing, but I'm telling you, these basic actions I use for pretty much everything 90% of the time. So it's pretty important. Another thing that we do a lot in Figma is selection. So you can select one shape, you can select the other, but how do you select both shapes? You can drag to select. That's obvious, right? But what if you only want to, if you already selected both shapes, but you only wanted to select one, you just hold shift and you deselect, right? And you may think that's small, but you use that a lot. I thought it was pretty small, and I ended up using it all the time. I'm just saying. So what if you wanted to select multiple items over and over? So you just hold shift to select things individually, hold shift to, again, to unselect. And when you select, you can move things around at the same time. So yeah, that part is convenient. Okay, so let's move on to the next step of the design after I drink some water. Okay. So the next step is to come up with some of the text content. And honestly, between me and you, typography is something so underappreciated in design. Like, I feel like at least whenever I started off with, I was like, okay, it's just fonts, text. You just choose whichever one someone else has already chosen. It's whatever. I would say typography is like fashion. It's like the clothes you wear. You have to wear the right clothes for the right occasion. So you have to choose that appropriately. And actually, a lot of websites nowadays, if you want to know what is kind of the secret glue that ties a lot of websites together, it's the typography. It's the text. So we're gonna go there. So where do we find fonts? Well, I use Google fonts a lot, and actually Figma already has all of Google font available, so you don't have to like download it or anything, right? So we can look a lot of typography, and honestly, let me tell you, a lot of them look the same. If you try to dig deep into typography, you'll lose your mind. You'd be surprised how deep you can go on a single font. But at least for beginning stuff, right? A lot of them looks the same. You can follow a font everyone likes to use a lot. Like for example, Roboto. They make Roboto so it's usable for a lot of context and situation. But remember, we're Mobi. We're a developer coffee shop, and if we want to focus on developer ideas, right? One font that comes to mind is using monospace fonts. A monospace font is, it's like code. So let me show y'all examples. Here's some monospace fonts, right? And one specific font that I just love, that is well designed, and you can read up on it. Like they actually have a whole website on it. Is IBM Plex. It is IBM Plex. That's what we're gonna use. So IBM Plex, it has developer connections and it feels comfortable and all that, right? So which one do we use, right? Do we use a sans? Do we use a serif, a mono? Like, does it really matter? I mean, a little bit, right? There are technical considerations, like serifs are easier to read for body-sized fonts, like just normal text, or sans serif looks more modern, right? But let's also consider like our original design ideas, right? So if we go back to our reference over here, right? It's industrial and homey. You can see the industrial components, the pipes, the city work, the bricks, right? It's industrial, but it's also homey. So you could say, you can make an argument for some of these designs. You could say, I want to use a serif because it is traditional and it is homey, so I want to focus on that part more. Or you can use the sans because you want to focus specifically on like, oh, it's modern and coffee shops are modern, and I want a developer spirit to it, right? So you use IBX Plex Sans, and it's really subjective, and who knows which one is better? The only way you can know is by experimentation. It goes back to the creative process that you want to keep your mind open to any kind of design ideas. Maybe one will be better than the other. Maybe you'll like one more than the other, right? So you can try both. Who knows? But for me, I'm going to use serif because I really like the warmth inside of a coffee shop, and serifs have that warmth, and it has that developer spirit in IBM Plex serif. And I know it's a lot for a font, but let me tell you, fonts are like, I think 60% of like the entire site, and it plays a bigger deal in things than you can imagine. So let's do that. Let's type out some typography. Okay, so to type text, use the text tool, and then you just select any way you want. I'm gonna use these three parts that I've stolen from the mission, the prompt statement. So we're gonna use chill, and then hang and code. So to adjust the text, right? We can select the text, and then we can see that there are options that we can choose. So we're gonna use IBM Plex. Do this later. IBM Plex serif. Ooh, talking aloud takes a lot of energy. Okay. So we're gonna use IBX Plex serif. The next decision, and by the way, design, a lot of decision making, right? Each decision will have a role to play in its meaning. Imagine if you were moving in furniture in your room. That's a decision, right? Lots of parts, but the decision making is part of what makes a design. Okay, so next decision, how big is the font? You're thinking, that is such a small thing to fuss about. But I will say, knowing the right size of the font will help tie your page together. It's kind of like an invisible glue. Think of things like in music notation, right? You have notes that are constant, you have notes that play louder than others, but they all have this rhythm to it, and there's also this consistency, right? So using that metaphor, a typographic scale follows that function. And this is technically something called a modular scale, right? It's a typographic scale. You might be tempted to like, okay, I'll just choose whichever number you want. And honestly, yeah, I'd say go for it. Whatever gets you closest to what you want. But using a typographic scale helps. So what I'm going to do is choose number 48. And why did I choose 48? Well, there are a lot of considerations. So like one is, how big is this type compared to other shapes? So compared to this rectangle and compared to these letters, how big is it compared to each other? Another thing that is really important that is a lot of times not considered, this is one thing I learned recently, is how big is it compared to the page itself, right? That plays a really big deal. Everything is secretly connected to each other together. And if you think about things in proportion, right? Like small to big, right? If I made this too big, like 288, it might throw off the rhythm, the shape. Like maybe like this shape is too, like this is too closely sized to this rectangle. And maybe you're trying to read the website and you're like, okay, I want to read this text and I want to read this rectangle. And I'm like, what am I looking at now, right? It can get confusing basically. And I say one big principle in design, or just in literal, in just any kind of art form, in my opinion, is the idea of conflict, right? Something that is super interesting has a lot of annoying parts. So I'm not saying making your design annoying, but create a lot of dynamics, right? Parts that draw interest. So what does that mean? So I could have made my design like this. I could have said I wanted two rectangles, a square, a rectangle, and a rectangle, right? Like this. I could have had it balanced out. And people would be like, oh, it is nice, it is peaceful, because it is even, right? But that is so boring. And maybe boring is what you want. Like that's a statement you want for your design. But a lot of times it's so much more interesting to like create tension. And creating tension means creating like parts where things aren't balanced, things that lead your eye to another place. Because in the real world, a lot of things aren't balanced out, right? And you want to focus on that part. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to 48 pixel font. and then we're going to make the type. So again, I'm using my Alt key to duplicate my text, just like that. So bam, I got that out. And say, what if like my text was just like literally like this, and I was too lazy to like drag each part one by one down? I could actually do something like this. I can drag and select each of the shapes, and over here you see these things in the corner. I can like align them all to one single part. All right, another thing I can do is change the type. And then the last one is code. Chilhane code. All right, so now what we can do is, now that we have the type, we're gonna use this same kind of style everywhere, right? So what would be nice is that if we do use this style somewhere else, right, you want to change one style one at a time. So this is where design in Figma is actually really object-oriented. Like Figma has object-oriented design. I'm gonna call it that. Designers might roast me for it, but I'm just gonna call it that. So what I'm gonna do is create a style. So you see this 4 dots in the corner. I'm making a text style, and I'm gonna call it title. And what I'm gonna do is, well, what that title did was like it basically collected all the settings into one, so you don't have to change it every time. So for example, if I look at my text style over here and I'm like, I do not like the size of this anymore, I can like change it all at once. And notice how this part didn't change, right? But what if I apply the title style now? Bam, it changed, and then you're like, okay, I messed up, my life is terrible. Then you can just change it back. Cool. All right, so what is the next part of our website? So another really big part is this, the navigation and the logo. And, you know, as a designer, I hate following conventions, honestly, because I think like if everyone copied the same website and like the best looking website, like you weren't the designers of the original website, so you're not going to be capture the spirit of the website fully. You're doing an imitation of the website, and also it's just boring. Like, why would you want someone to look similar to the other? You want to be unique and stand out and capture people's attention your own way for what you have. But in the context of the web, right, people have expectations. There are UX goals. People always go towards the top right corner for navigation, or people always go towards the top for utility. There's a header, there's a body, right? There is a structuring to the web that people expect, and if you don't follow it, like people will have to figure that part out, and it can get annoying. Depending on what your website is, you have to adjust to that. Like, what if you're making a business oriented site where you're trying to advertise, right? You want to make sure that you do follow those conventions, and you're like, what are these conventions? Well, I'm gonna say go to this website, Nielsen UX, the Nielsen Norman Group. So basically, if you go through this website, you'll learn like a really good portion of UX, like so much of it. And there's this one thing, since heuristic, that if you follow this, you're going to be able to cover a lot of UX problems throughout your site. You can follow these rules straight up if you want to, but again, a lot of things in design has a lot of discretion to it, so just consider that, right? Don't be hung up onto the rules, because the rules on the web change all the time and they're defined by the leaders. So you have to make your own statement sometimes. All right, so next part of the website is navigation. So a lot of times what people do is put their logo or brand right here, but because I don't want to, well, first of all, the Mobi logo is using a sans serif and a different font altogether. And if I try to pair it with this font with a completely different spirit, it wouldn't make sense. Like, a good analogy of using typography is like, what if I wore a suit, like a tuxedo, and like jeans together? Like, it would, I mean, I guess it's a look to sort of some people, but it can throw people off. So you want to keep that consistency in mind. So I'm just using a simple text logo. And one thing I'm doing, another decision I'm making, again, a lot of small details add up in design, is that notice how I use the same font size. And you may think that it's not a lot, but it does make a difference because your brain is good at picking up patterns. And in design, we always work with patterns. And one of the patterns is sizing. This thing is similarly sized to this. And you're like, how's that a problem? Well, it's less of a problem because whenever I put this further away from this text, just by proximity, they're not related, right? Like those two are separate parts and they have separate ideas and meanings, and you're able to pick that up. But if you put it close together, right? And I'm not saying like you would have to do this, but if you put it close together, it'll be hard to pick up the context. So I think in graphics design, that principle is called the Gestalt Principles. If you follow this might help you a lot with like trying to make a decision. Oh man. But yeah, as you can see, there's a lot of principles, like the Gestalt Principles, but it helps you understand how humans pick up shapes better, or shape and relationship, things like that. So what I'm going to do, how do I solve that problem, is to reduce the font size, right? So I can do 18 or 24. One thing about font sizes is that, again, one big part of graphics design is contrast, and by contrast, you have interest, right? One thing you can do is make contrast by proportion. So in typography, you're like, how do I style what is the title and what is the body font, right? Or the body text size. And again, a lot of times I feel like just because design systems exist, people feel like there is a right, a good body font has to be 12 points. A good title is 36 or something. Okay, like those are just outlines or rules. Like these are things that industry pros may have said, but you don't. But that's in their context, right? If you follow their design system, you have to follow their system of consistency. But if you have your own design, you can come up with whatever works for you. Trust your eyes, trust your users. And I'm not saying don't trust design systems. Those things are tried, researched extensively, so they work. I'm just saying you don't have to stick to the rules every time because they are really discrete. Like your human eye and understanding is something that is, you can't just theorize 100%. So I'm gonna go over like typographic hierarchy. So like whatever you look at first with typography. So you have like this big text over here. This is the title. And what I like to do is that you can go at this at several proportions, right? So like if they were next to each other like this, you might say this is the title and this is the subtitle, right? But say you wanted to build a different relationship. What if you wanted it to be a body type font? You can reduce the size even more. And notice how it looks. It's hard to see 100% because, you know, this is side by side. But in terms of proportion, I notice it's like literally extra. But it does make a difference. In terms of proportion, right, it's interesting because there's a disbalance and your brain's like, I want to balance this. or you're like, there's contrast going on. So it's interesting. Like if you wore, I'm using a fashion example again, like if you wore white and white, like everything white, you'd be like, okay, that's the same, kind of boring. But if you wore like something with a lot of contrast, what a lot of people do is like, what if I wore a black shirt and like white pants, right? You create a lot of interest, right? Because there's contrast. So this applies to typography too in scale. So this font is smaller. The smaller it is, the more interesting it is. It can get a little difficult to read, but it creates a dynamic. Like this chill is so much bigger than the Mobi, right? And you can play a lot around with this a lot. And because the Mobi isn't as significant, it's like, you know, you can create a lot of relationships just considering scale in mind. So yeah, there's that. So what I like to do is make it readable enough, right? I don't want this to be too small, but I want it to be different enough. So it's at 24 pixels. and I'm moving this towards the corner. Why did I choose the corner? Because the corner is where a lot of people expect logos to be. I mean, I can literally go onto a website right now and boom, logo in the corner, navigation on the right. Literally just going on to a random website. Yeah. Okay, so what are the next parts? The next parts are the about, contact, and by the way, I kind of hate this kind of structuring not because it's a bad thing, but again, it's not personable, and there's always an opportunity to take your design to the next level to connect it more to what it is all about. Just for simplicity, I'm just working with about and contact, but you can make it really personal. You could be like, okay, we're Mobi, so we have hackathons, right? And just by doing that, you know, it really puts into the personality of the website. Small details, big differences. It's how you present yourself. Okay, boom, boom. Okay, again, what I did was just I aligned it to the top shape, so I don't have to like select each one and like try to align it one by one. Another thing I'm doing is, say, what if this is not distributed well? You can just select this, right? And then you can select this thing on the corner over here. So you can distribute the horizontal spacing, and it would realign itself properly. If you check, it's both 94 pixels apart, so it's all nice. You're like, what if I don't want that? Like, what if I wanted something different? You can use this to resize things at the same time. So yeah, it's another convenience feature that Mobi has. And not Mobi, Figma. And another thing that you can do is that if you see these small dots, you can reorder things. So that's nice too. And notice that you have to select it every single time you want to do something like this. But if you didn't want to, you can group it with, I press Control G, but you can also go here and group it. See, group selection. And by default, you can see these options being available. So boom, 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 boom. So I will do things just like that. Okay. All right, so I pushed it to the side. All right, so our next problem is that we need content. And actually that's I feel like in general for graphics design, that's such a big problem. By the way, as you can tell, whenever you drag things around in Figma, they align to each other, which is honestly one of the best parts about Figma. Where was I at? Yeah, one of the biggest problem about design is like you need things to fill up your room. What's the furniture? Do you even know what furniture you're gonna get? Like, what's the do I need a rug? Like, what's gonna be there, right? And if you have like an empty room, maybe that's a statement. Again, everything's discretionary. But what I like to do is think about what parts are useful, and if I don't know, I can always refer back to what I was inspired from, which was this, right? I can go back to the menu and see how they laid out the menu and get inspired off of that and play with a bunch more experiments. One thing we can do, just to fill out the page, is if we want a menu, what is a menu right now? What is a menu in code right now? For Mobi, a menu might be our upcoming workshops, right? So let's do that. Let me come up with an example. So design workshop, and because it's like on a menu, the font is different on this menu, and we want to make it different here, we could like change it up here. So we'll do IBM Plex Mono, and this is going to be our secret glue, right? I call it secret glue because on a website, you know, what makes Mobi, what makes this in particular developer site, it's the mono, like the mono typography. Like if you're a developer, right, you're gonna like feel attached to certain, like, I don't know about other people, but for me, I feel attached to the font I use in my coding editor, right? Like you see it every day, and you can recognize a mono. You're like, that's ours. We're a developer. That's ours. So playing off of the part that it's like big identity of developer, you could like use a mono font here and use it as the tie for what makes this a developer website. Okay, so now I have text on the blackboard. Another problem. Notice how it is similarly sized to this, right? And a thing about design is when you're on the fence about something, I mean, again, maybe it's something you want, but again, what makes a design super interesting is contrast, right? Something's just being truly different from each other. So to do that, I am going to make it not too much on the fence and have like distinctions. So what I'm going to do is resize this to a smaller font size, maybe 24. And it may be similar to this, but I'm going to take the risk because I don't want it to be too small. I want it to still be there, right? Okay, so let's give it a date, 2021. And just like that, we've got possibly a menu. And what we could do another more like, I don't know, quote unquote, heirloom interaction is you can do a dot just like this. And it's kind of reminiscent. Dang, I need to drink some water. Okay. And say we're gonna need a lot more menu items. So let's come up with more workshops. So I can drag a design just like this, and then I can just duplicate, and I just press Control D for that. And now I'm gonna do some more website designs. So let's say for this one, let's do backend development workshop. And what we're gonna do is that, and we can do another front end one. One thing that I did do that is like seemingly small decision is like, notice how everything is capitalized. And you're like, that is why does that matter? Well, it matters because again, going back to our reference, what is industrial, right? If I choose to use like uppercase, lowercase, like this, it's kind of like, okay, this is something I expect. It's professional, or maybe it's warm, or it's friendly or familiar. But I will say, like, it doesn't, for me, I personally chose it to be capitalized because I feel like, you know, industrial is metallic and all that. So metallic, and metallic is all geometric, and if it's capitalized, it's super geometric. So again, we can just change up some dates. 5, 12. So just changing up some things, give an idea. Ideally, whenever you do choose text for web design, you want to make it all personal. So like Docker. Okay. And then let's do one more. Node.js. Okay. Let's do 8/23. Okay. And to switch things up a bit, we're going to take certain parts. Okay, notice how whenever I select this square, it's always selecting the square, and like I'm moving the square every time. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lock the square. And when I lock it, I can't select it anymore. Whoops. Okay, when I lock the square, just like this. So boom, I can't select it anymore. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select certain parts, and then I'm going to move it down. And notice how whenever I try to move it down, right, I hold shift to align it. Or like I don't hold shift, but it shows you where you should align things. And boom. Okay. All right, so let's go with that. It looks different enough. Notice how there's another problem. This is on top of that. So what you can do is bring this to the front. And how do you know what is laid up on top of each other? Look at the side. Whatever is higher on the top is on top of each other, and whatever is on the bottom is in the background. So let's move all of this into the background. And remember, I don't want this to be selected. So I hold Shift, deselect, and then I group it. Boom. So now everything is in one. So now I basically have a menu. So again, big problem of design is having the content. There's a lot of empty space, and honestly, that can be a good thing sometimes, because what's the function of having space? Well, space, it gives things a lot of attention. That's why like negative space is a thing, or white space is a thing, because it gives that piece a lot of attention, right? If I put this in the middle, you'll be like, your attention will be drawn to this part. And another secret thing about white space, and again, going off of like Gestalt principle, is like secretly, it's actually like this. Like this could be the frame, and you don't know it. So that's the function that it's serving. Okay. All right, so looking at this and all the text, I'm noticing that this is getting lost in the details. So I'm gonna change the title to be bigger. So maybe like 64. Okay. And notice how I'm not using color. I'm not using color because color is really complicated. It may seem simple, but choosing colors is like deeply like contextual and interactive. Its meaning changes based on another color you can see. There have been entire books, like artists would read entire books on color, make sure it's like its own thing, right? So yeah, it's something that is pretty fickle. So I choose not to work with color immediately. So one thing I do is keep things in grayscale until I can choose better. And why did I choose that to be in grayscale? Because these two elements are too close to each other. And whenever they're this close to each other, it creates a lot of tension, and it can be disturbing. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't, but that's an option that's there. Okay, we can do this. Again, it's still kind of dark. So maybe this. Maybe. Just maybe. We'll keep that in mind for now. All right, so we need to fill out some content, right? So where do we get content? So we have the Mobi website, so utamobi.com. All right, or we can have the mission statement from here. Let me see. Oh, by the way, I'm moving through the Figma board using my middle mouse button. So I'm holding the middle mouse button and moving around. I probably could have mentioned that earlier. Sorry about that. But yeah, you can also move by holding the space bar. Ooh, no. Oh, be quiet. No. Just let me select the font. Okay. What I'm gonna do is just type it out. Hold on. Okay. Mobi is a developer coffee shop. It's a place to hang, chill, code, and have fun. Okay, notice how this thing is huge, right? One thing that happens a lot whenever you're typing things out is, let me resize this. Okay, 18. Mono. Is that it tends to be like sized like this, right? Sometimes you don't want that, and you want it to be sized normally, because when you size it like this, it's basically holding placeholder text. Excuse me. So here, if you double click the edges, it will resize. And what you can do is resize it like this. And now the next problem. One big limitation in web design is, well, you can't align things easily. Ideally, in graphics design, you would like align it to the 4 or align it to the C, right? But that can be hard. So basically, that's because the web works like this. It's a box model. Basically, you have your margin, which is this. Let me make my rectangles real quick. So your margin is the spacing that pushes the element left or right from the outside bounds. And then you have your padding, which is, can I do this? No. Which is this. Your padding is this. So your padding pads the content within the box. So if the padding was smaller, the content would be like this. But if the margins were like bigger, like it would push the element to the left or right. So basically that's how spacing works. So you can't just like, I want to align it to the C and just paste it there. That's not how it works. Can't do that. It's pretty sad, I know, but it's like a limitation. The one thing we can get around this is like, what if this is just in the background? What if this is just in the background, this square, right? And these two things are in the foreground, so they're like this, right? They're together. So now they're both tied to each other, and we're considering that for web design whenever we code up the website, right? So there we have that. All right. So how else will we get content onto the screen, right? So here we can add small intermediary details. So like, looking at this website, there could be some space here. There can be something here to balance something off, right? So let's put something here. So for example, we have like this menu. So what could be useful is like here's our calendar, right? And we can put it here. And a lot of times, if you don't have like text or anything, you can include graphics. And that's where the graphics design part comes in, making graphic content to kind of balance out and work with the space we have. Okay, and maybe over here, we might have like some announcement, like announcement, hack Texas is happening, right? And maybe we'll be like, maybe it'll be like this, maybe it'll be like this, like it could be a lot, right? So you line it up, and then maybe you need something more to balance things out. And going back to coffee shop design, we can like draw more inspiration. Like what if we had like some hanger plants here or something, right? And then we filled out some text on top. All right, it is 4, so I'm gonna go over like one final part of like designing a website. I know it's like not fully complete, but whenever you're like at a stage where it's getting close to completion, right? What you want to do is that you want to measure things out. So you can click on any element and measure it off, and you would follow things. You would follow kind of like a system to size up the measurements between things. So like, for example, you're gonna use a 8-point grid to measure things out. So like everything's in multiple 4s. This thing's gonna be spaced off 32 pixels. This thing is gonna be spaced off 32 pixels, right? So you can line things up like that. And then after you fix up the dimensions in small parts, you basically send it off to the developer and you're done. All right. I'm going to conclude our presentation here. This basically covers most of the basics for using Figma. And hopefully y'all gained a couple things to learn about coding up, or not coding up, or designing a website and how to design in general. So awesome on that end. Do y'all have any questions? Because I mean, it should be fine either way, because after this we're having social coding for an hour where I might like continue developing this website and y'all can follow along. So there's that. With that said, it's been fun designing this website and like explaining it. I hope y'all gain something out of this creative process, and I'm looking forward to talking with y'all in the future. All right, see y'all. Thanks a lot.